There we go. Thank you. Wow, pleasure to be here. Right, we're going to do something slightly unorthodox now, which anybody who's seen me present before will not come as a surprise to you. And I'm going to talk to you about generative AI and how it can help you do some interesting things. So we're just queuing this up. I don't use PowerPoint because I don't like PowerPoint. It limits my creativity and generability, and I have a dislike of Microsoft Office. So once I started working for myself, I decided that I would not use Microsoft Office as a principal. Can I grab that? Thank you so much. Hopefully this bar will disappear at some point. No. So what do I do? People often say, my mum loves to know what I do. I haven't explained it to her satisfaction, but hopefully this might mean something to you, which is I bring creativity and behavioural science to ethics and compliance. And by the way, anytime you see a Lego version of me, and there's a ton of Lego in this presentation, it means I'm making a very, very important point. So this is what I do. And I did want to just warn you, if Marcus and anybody from Munich is looking a bit nervous, the reason is this is the Bavarian police outfit, and you'll notice that it looks rather similar to the suit I'm wearing. So they're not looking nervous because of what I'm about to say, they're looking nervous because they're having PTSD flashbacks to various instances. So I want to introduce you to a brand new resource that I'm hoping I can encourage you to add to your teams. And I've got a little character reference for them. It's not great, to be honest, right? They lie, exaggerate, forget crucial details, and sometimes make things up just to sound smart. They're overconfident, struggle with ethics, and are never accountable for their mistakes. Which reminds me of someone. And of course, with that description, that is not the kind of person that you are going to want to hire into your compliance function. That is a description of somebody that you would steer a million miles away from. And yet that, of course, is a description of how generative AI works. And so I'm going to try and persuade you as to why it's a good idea for you to take on board a resource that has the capabilities and dynamics that we've put on the screen. And of course, let's have a look at some of the things it gets wrong. I want to be fully transparent about what I ask you to take on board here. Anybody heard about this strawberry definition thing? If you are, they've corrected this, by the way, so if you try and replicate it, you will find it's corrected. But somebody discovered that if you asked ChatGPT, other generative AI products are available, how many R's are there in strawberry? And I've put it helpfully here just in case anybody's confused. It came back and said there are 2 R's in strawberry because it's not actually counting the number, it's just trying to predict. And so when we look at something like that, you think, well, if it can't even get that right, that's not great for things that actually matter. And I also asked it to pull up my resume, thought might be quite helpful. What you will see is the bits in red is what I'll politely call bullshit. The bits in green are actually the accurate bits. And let me just try and pull this up. Go rid of that. And you can see that it's made up quite a few things. And the reason it's done that is what it's done is it's basically filled in what should my CV look like for somebody that does the sort of thing I do. And you can see it's got some of it right and a lot of it wrong, which kind of tells you that I've had an unorthodox career path. So if it can't get how many R's are in strawberry right and it can't get my biography right, that's not particularly helpful. And I said to you at the beginning that I bring creativity and behavioural science to ethics and compliance. It's that creativity that I want to focus on because the creativity is the reason that I think generative AI can help us. And the reason we need to be creative in compliance is we're going to have to do more with less resources. Right? There's more regulations, more pressure, more things going on. You will probably get ESG and a ton of other responsibilities added to your list. And of course, they're not going to give you the extra resources to do this because, well, you don't have much to do anyway. So we're trying to do more with less, and therefore creativity, brilliant way of solving that problem. You're going to need to engage your stakeholders. That might be regulators, that might be the business, might be the people that pay for you to exist in your roles. And to engage stakeholders, I think it's a good idea to think creatively about how we do that. After all, they may choose to cut our budget if they don't perceive that there's some value there. And we are also going to need to be more human. Because in a world where machines are getting smarter, and we can give machines repetitive tasks that are predictable, what are the humans going to do? And the answer is do the things that the machines can't yet. So in a world where we need to be more human and demonstrate the difference between us and the machines, the reason they still need us around is we're going to have to be more human. And I think, ironically, generative AI can help us to do that. So these are some of the reasons why I think creativity is a helpful skill set to have. And so I say that generative AI is a great gift for compliance officers. With one big caveat, which is why my little Lego friend is helping us out, for certain types of task. And I want to tell you what those tasks are so that we can start to think about how it can help us. Now, it is not useful for everything. Just as the old expression goes, if you have a hammer, you will end up looking like every problem becomes a nail. Right? There are certain tasks that we will not be using generative AI for because it's dangerous. But there'll be certain other things where it is the perfect tool. And what I'm showing you here is something from my book. There's a great German word, by the way, called Schleichwerbung, which means stealth advertising. This is a good example of that. I'm stealthily advertising my book for you. And in my book, I talk about having the right tools for the job. And my favorite tool is pizza scissors. Now, if you've anybody come across pizza scissors here before, this is a thing from Naples. None of these silly little wheels or trying to sort of slice things with a knife. You just need a pair of scissors. And the brilliant thing, if you buy pizza in Naples, is you can have exactly the size of slice you want. Just point to them how much of the pie do you want, and they will cut it for you using a pair of scissors. Pizza scissors, absolute genius invention. And so, you wouldn't use pizza scissors for cutting paper because it'll ruin them, but it's perfect for this thing. We need to think about generative AI not as a tool that we'll use all the time, but a tool that has very specific benefits to us. And the challenge I had, back to a little bit more Schleichwerbung for you, I was writing my book, and I had to submit my book to the publisher about a week before ChatGPT was released. So what you're going to see here are some of the chapters that would have made it in the book if ChatGPT had been around at the time. So I like this idea of ChatGPT looming through the windows. I'm desperately sitting on my Lego typewriter, finishing the book. Now, many of you will say, well, we can't use generative AI because we've banned it in our organisation. Right? We're too risky, we've banned our employees from doing it. I have a contention that even if you have banned it, that your employees will be using it. The smart ones will be using it. They will be working out how they can seem smarter and how they can do their job more effectively. They just probably won't be doing it on your systems. So I think it's also useful to know how generative AI works, because that is what you are potentially up against with your employees. You need to understand what they might do and the risks that they might pose. So what can we use generative AI for? Well, let's talk about what we shouldn't use it for. Let's not be using it for sensitive content, because we don't know where these things go. We don't want our sensitive content to be trained on data, and therefore that's a high risk thing. We don't want to use it for very technical matters, because it makes things up. We don't want to use it to, for example, review rules and regulations, because, well, it might create some additional things on there and just give us answers we don't want, or where we need a high degree of accuracy. We do not want to be unleashing it there. But what we can use it for, on the left-hand side, is things where there's a bit more of a creative edge, where we want insights, inspiration, and imagination. And I know that when you all think of the word compliance, these are the first things that come to mind. Inspiration, imagination, exciting words like that. And that's where I think it can help us. And so what I want to do for the rest of the session is really look at, well, why do we need these things and how might it help us to do those? And we're going to steer well clear of these. We're going to hang out in this sort of zone. And one of the brilliant things that generative AI, and I always talk about ChatGPT because it's the most obvious one, but all of these things are now multimodal. Big word there. What that means is it can handle different forms of media. So it can handle pictures, it can handle sound, as well as ordinary text. And it's this multimodal capability that I think is fascinating, because you've now got systems that we can communicate with in picture form and in sound, as well as on a keyboard. And it can also output in those particular forms. And so it's starting to get incredibly useful as a tool that's much more than just the written word. So the three use cases that I think we can use it for is design, diagnose, and diversify, 3 Ds. So let's have a look at some of the cases that I think we can use. So the first one is design. Our little Lego man is an wannabe architect. And I thought, it'd be nice to have, when I heard we were coming to Prosecco House, I had glorious visions of this building, and I thought, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could design a Prosecco House that looked like a Prosecco House? So there we have, in Lego form, what ChatGPT thinks we are currently in. So, brilliant example of just a bit of fun there, very easy to produce. And of course you're going to go, well, we don't need pictures of Prosecco House for our compliance program, and you're probably right. But what you do need is policies, training, communications, and it can help you with all of these things. If we want to design a training program or communications program, it can help us to do that. And if you think about a lot of policies, less so, but if you think about the way that we might want to communicate policies, the way we might want to summarize them with sort of helpful guides to policies, all of these things can benefit from creativity. If we're communicating with humans, it makes sense to think creatively, intelligently. How about we do that? If we're going to train people, we need to grab and hold their attention, otherwise there's no point in doing the training. And so as we look at these are all creative challenges. We can get ChatGPT or our preferred generative AI to help us to do that. So what examples might we ask for? Well, help me create an awareness campaign. Give me some ideas about how I could create an awareness campaign. Design a game to teach employees about whatever it is we want to teach them about. Really simple, so you don't have to do any of this thinking. It will come up with a load of ideas for you. And this is where the fact that it makes stuff up doesn't matter. Because we want it to be thinking loosely and creatively and coming up with ideas that we couldn't think of for ourselves. Finally, maybe I just want to make my emails that little bit more engaging. We all know that when people receive emails that say things like compliance update, they generally don't get very excited about it. So could we find a way to use marketing techniques to make sure that people do actually at least open our emails? And ChatGPT can help us with that. The next thing we can use it for is diagnosis. That's a doctor, by that's supposed to be a stethoscope. We can use it to diagnose, and this is where it gets super interesting. And I want to illustrate how it can help us diagnose things using something that I call compliance in the wild. So anybody who's following me on LinkedIn will know that I have a series called Compliance in the Wild, where I go out on safari and I find things out there in the real world that can help us to understand how compliance works and give us some ideas. And this is from a park that's just over near Battersea, where you can see this is an attempt to influence human behavior. This is a compliance regime that we have here. And we can see what they are trying to do. They do not wish people to cycle or scoot through this little park. But we can also see why this is the world's most stupid control. Because not only do we know how to get around it, but we also know that lots of other people have also got around it. A classic example of here's a brilliant control that we've just put in a place where it makes no sense. And this is a temptation that we can often have in compliance, where we have standardized control and we'll deploy it wherever this risk occurs. And that works really well until it doesn't. So it's a good example of what I call compliance in the wild. And yes, I do cycle through here frequently, making use of the dispensation that I have granted myself. So this is my compliance in the wild wolf, by the way. It's my little logo for the series. The wolf is the wild bit, and the compliance bit is, I've never seen anybody with a pen on their collar before, but I just love the idea that if you were going to be a proper compliance person, you'd have a checklist in your hand, and you would have a pen ready to hand at all times on your collar. So that's that there. But if we look at this as an example of something, what we can do is we can feed that picture through to our generative AI, and we can say, what can you see? So I upload that picture, and I get a pretty accurate description of what is in front of us. And I'm not going to read it all for you, but basically what it says here is pretty accurate as to what is happening, and it explains the basis of what the control is trying to do. Brilliant, by the way, if you ever need to do alt text, if you're posting something and you want to make it more accessible to people with visibility challenges, you can use this to generate alt text for pictures. Just put it up there. Fantastic way of just making your program more accessible. So we can get it to tell us what's going on, what can it see, and it's pretty accurate. And we can then say to it, well, explain to us, what is the point of this? What are they trying to do with this particular control? And it explains this there for safety, accessibility control, guiding people to stuff. It gives a really good explanation as to what this control is for. Now, we can do this with pictures, but we can also do it with words. I'm just using pictures because it's more interesting. But suddenly we've got the capabilities. Somebody can do some analysis for us and say, how is this working? How is this, what's going on here? And we can then go further and say, well, have a look at it, and what could we do to improve the situation? And so I've uploaded this picture, and it's basically analysed what is going on and come up with some suggestions for how to improve it. You can do the same thing with your policies and procedures if you want a good idea for how you might, what the challenges of it are, why it might not be working, better ways to describe things, better ideas. You can load this all in, and it will do all that analysis for you. It is a fantastic way of getting somebody else's brain on board to think about why the controls that you have might not be as effective. All the policies aren't as clear, anything else you like. The fact that it works with pictures means it'll also work with text. So we might think about using, for questions like, well, what are the potential unintended consequences of this policy, this approach, this control? Recognizing, of course, that any time we design something to influence human decision making, there's always going to be what the medical profession calls side effects. Stuff that we sort of wish didn't happen but kind of comes as part of the package. Worth remembering, of course, that when we talk about side effects, there is no such thing. Side effects is just the stuff that we didn't want to have happen. We call it side effects. It's an unpleasant byproduct. And we often forget that. Whenever we design a product, we often think, well, I've nailed it, right? We've sorted, this is the perfect control, perfect communication, perfect whatever. There are sometimes some potential unintended consequences, and this can help flesh that out. Because if you're the person that's designed a process or a control, it might be quite difficult for you to put yourself in the shoes of the end user. And so this can help us to think more interestingly about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So running something through generative AI can identify potential flaws that you might not have thought of. Or, this is my favorite one, how might someone circumvent this rule? So if I put in place a control, right, and I'm trying to influence people, and particularly if what I'm asking them to do is a pain in the butt, right, we all can think of compliance requirements that make life a little bit harder. I'm reminded of, you know when you go to the airport and they force you to walk through the duty-free section? Right? That is really irritating, right? Because it's stopping me from getting to the lounge or the gate or whatever. Well, I don't want to have to walk through the miles of Toblerone bars and alcohol. And as I think about that, it's a nuisance. If I could find a way around that, I would. Humans in your organization are sentient. If you are presenting them with a rule or requirement that makes their life more painful, they are going to start thinking these terms. So why not think about that in advance? Right? Just ask the question, how would you try and get around this? You can start to stress test whether the rules you've put in place make sense or not. Have someone creatively thinking about it. I did actually put this particular scenario through ChatGPT. One of the suggestions was hire a spaceship and fly over the control, which is a solution. But it comes up with a lot of crazy ideas, but you sometimes get some real gems in there, stuff you haven't necessarily thought of. And then the final way is just to say, well, what alternative ways? So here's what I think I want to do, but is there an alternative way of doing this? Right? Just come up with some other ideas that might help me think about that. We can start to diagnose why we're getting things done in a certain way. Does that make sense? Is it potentially a more effective way of doing it? And so again, when we're looking at policies, training, or communications, have we phrased it in the right way? Is there a better way that we could phrase this? Could we get our message across using a different medium, different format? All of these things become possible because we can just ask the AI to go and think about it for us. And remember, we're doing this creatively because, well, we've thought of all the logical stuff ourselves. So what we need help with is not thinking logically, but we need help thinking about alternatives, smart ways that we might do things differently. The other thing we can use it for is to get a little bit of diversity into our thinking. And I'm thinking particularly of cognitive diversity. Because, well, compliance people tend to be of a similar ilk, right? We hire a certain type of person in the function, and so wouldn't it be a good idea to broaden that out and to get more people on the case? And I want to show you the power of cognitive diversity with one of my favourite pictures. I don't have to explain who this is, and this is rather rude, right? This is disgraceful, but we know that the royal family's had a few issues with the press, so perhaps he's expressing his opinion of the gathered media until I show you. Well, I'll ask ChatGPT to tell me what's happening. The image shows a man standing by an open car door, gesturing with his middle finger, which is considered an offensive gesture in many cultures. The man appears to be blah, 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 blah. It's a pretty good analysis of what's there. Now, what that picture doesn't show you is the alternative angle. He's actually signalling to the press about how many kids he's got. What looks from this angle like a vulgar gesture towards the media is actually from this angle revealed to be something a little bit politer and more engaging. And that's a good illustration of the power of having a different perspective on things. Because if we just had this particular lens to look at the world, we would think that the royal family were a rude bunch of people making vulgar gestures, whereas in fact we have this second lens. Now often in the real world we don't have that opportunity for a second view of things, but we can with generative AI. We can get a second perspective on what we're looking at. And if you think about the rules and things that you put in place, you understand what the purpose of those is, right? You're experts in that space. But the employees that you're trying to communicate with are not experts. Whisper it, they probably don't care. They're not interested in compliance. How do I know they're not interested in compliance? If they were interested in compliance, they would be working with you. They are instead interested in sales or whatever it is that their day job is. I'm not saying they're not interested in doing their job compliantly, but they're not necessarily passionate about compliance. And so when we look at things from our perspective, we might understand the rationale. We might, in fact, this is very, we understand what's going on here. They might view compliance a little bit like this, right? So they don't understand why are you asking me to do this really annoying thing? I don't understand it. And it's really hard for us to put ourselves in their shoes because we know why the rules are there, we know why the processes are there. And so what we're trying to do is to communicate to people that don't care, don't understand it. And so having a different perspective on things can actually be incredibly powerful. And so if we take this illustration, I've asked it to then tell me what can it see here. This is one of the second image. The same man, it's recognised it's the same one, is standing next to a car, appears to be gesturing with his hand holding up 3 fingers. His expression suggests he may be engaged in conversation. This provides additional context. The first image might have captured an unintended or misinterpreted gesture. And so when we start to think about what this can do, is it can start to analyse situations, give us a dispassionate lens on what is going on. And I've asked it to go into a little bit more detail. And the reason I've asked it to do this is not because I think you're there trying to analyse pictures in your processes, but the level of analysis it can do of what it sees in front of it, the level of dispassionate analysis, is pretty powerful stuff. Right? It can analyse what it thinks is going on here. It's got some really good ideas about what we might be looking at. And those same lenses can be turned on the policies and procedures and communications that you have. So if you want to make sure that your messages are landing perfectly with your audience, who may not speak compliance, or you're an international organisation and you have people with different cultures who speak different languages, we can use this same analysis to say, how would this land with that audience? If we think about younger generations who might use different vocabulary, different language, we can target things like that. I'm not so you can get to write it to you in millennial speak if you want, but you can actually just get it to say, is this clear? Is this obvious? Is there a better way to express this particular thing? It has that sort of capability. You might go, you are a regulator. Right. Review what I'm going to say to the regulator. Is this compelling? What questions might you have? You can use it to prep for regulatory meetings. You can also go, you are a salesperson. Tell me what questions you might have about this particular policy or this communication. You can put it in the shoes of the people that you want to talk to and get it to help you practice for that. What have I missed with this is one of my favourite questions. We often think we have nailed it. We could not have been clearer in our policies. We could not have been clearer in our communications, and for some reason they still didn't get it. Well, wouldn't it be a good idea before we sent it out to just go, what else have we missed? What might not be as clear as we think it is when we're trying to communicate? And you have somebody here that doesn't care about your feelings. ChatGPT does not care that you are going to be crying into your tea when you discover all the things that it's found that are wrong with your communications. It's going to be brutally honest with you. And often when we talk to other human beings, they will think about our feelings. And they go, that is the crappiest bit of communication I have ever seen, but I can't tell him that. In this case, it can, and it will. And you can get that perspective that you can't get otherwise. Incredibly powerful. And then one of my other favourites explained this to me like I'm 5 years old. And I think one of the things that is interesting is as we try and take very technical subjects, and if we think about sort of privacy laws and all these new rules around AI, for example, that are all coming in, there's super technical information. And what do we tend to do? We say, well, the way we cover ourselves in compliance is let's stick as closely as we can to the original regulation. We'll just transpose that into our policies and we'll train people on the policies. Because that makes life safe for us, right? Nobody can hammer us because, well, we've just carried it all the way through. But that doesn't help the average person to understand it. How can we get messages across? And so this is a brilliant way of thinking, actually, are we being as clear as we can be? Are we finding ways to communicate with people? And I think whether you choose 5 is, of course, reflective of your employee. How sophisticated do you think your employees are? You might want to push it up to 10, maybe. But nonetheless, what we're trying to do here is to take complex subjects And compliance is really complex, very complex. In fact, if you look in the dictionary, where does compliance sit? Between the words complex and complicated. It tells you everything you want to know about your discipline. So if we're trying to get complicated messages, complex messages across to people, maybe actually having a thing that says, explain it to me like I'm 5 or 10 years old, could be a really powerful way of making sure, are we distilling that in a way that is genuinely comprehensible to people who are busy, who have other things to do. So there's some things that we can do with it. What are my 3 rules of using generative AI in compliance? The first one is, or the third one, sorry, this is a cunning trick, by the way, that I messed up completely, but if you ever want to do like 3 things you need to know, our typical tendency is to go 1, 2, 3. But think of all those TV shows where they do countdowns, where you hang around to find out what number 1 is. You wouldn't hang around to watch the show if they started with number 1 and moved down. So always flip things in reverse. So number 3 is co-create. One of the things that people often get wrong with generative AI is they ask it a question and they go, that was a bit crap. Not the answer I wanted. Don't treat this thing like a gospel that is to be consulted. It is a co-creator alongside you. Now that might mean that you put things in front of it and say, what do you think of this? Or you get it to suggest something and then you iterate off the back of it. But the reason people get terrible responses with generative AI is that they don't think about it as a co-creation exercise. They think about it as like, I am consulting the Oracle spits out nonsense, the Oracle's an idiot. Instead, what we need to do is iterate off each other. So when it gives you an answer, go back to it again, ask a few more questions, co-create content. Sometimes you'll want to be the first creator, sometimes you want it to be that. But it's a co-creation exercise, not just simply it giving you an answer. The second thing is play with it. One of the things that you discover with generative AI is that it can do some quite random, unexpected things. Terrible for accuracy and technical things, brilliant for creativity. But if you ask it the same question on 2 separate occasions, you may well get slightly different answers. If I ask it to generate the same image, and all these images that you've seen are obviously generated by ChatGPT, I can ask for the same thing on 2 separate occasions and get 2 completely different things. So we need to play with it and see what comes out and recognize that it's not necessarily going to be perfect first time. It's a little bit of a temperamental genius, but playing with it's really, really important. The final thing is pay. Most people that use generative AI use the free one. And you know what? The free one is crap. If you use the free ChatGPT 3, you are basically using a steam train. Lovely, but not fit for purpose. What we want is a nice high-speed express thing. It's about 20 quid a month. I thoroughly recommend it. The step up is massive. Do not make the mistake of writing off generative AI because you've used the free one. Try out the thing and you'll find it significantly better. Faster as well. And I want to illustrate all of these things by a little trip I made recently to a certain country. Anybody know which country this is? This is not really the country, it's a Lego rendition. Anyone recognise that? Kosovo? Yeah. Spot on. I was in Pristina, and as I've been going with you now, I wanted to have some generative AI to illustrate the presentation that I was giving. And the hot topic in Pristina is money laundering. And the reason the hot topic there is that the country wants to join the EU, and one of the things that they have to get sorted is the fact that money laundering has historically been a problem there. And so I was talking about the challenges of money laundering and the psychology behind it, some behavioural science about it, and I thought I need some images to illustrate this. I want to illustrate money laundering. I want to have a picture of money laundering. And I've got in my head, you know that classic image of the washing machine? And people shoveling cash into a washing machine. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a Lego version of that? So I put in a prompt asking ChatGPT to produce the thing I had in my head. Welcome to Human Risk versus Artificial Intelligence, the Kosovan battle. Because I said to him, something along the lines, I put not actual gameplay. You know when they show you adverts for computer games and they put the bottom not actual gameplay? Right? In other words, the game is going to be significantly crapper than what you can see now. I've summarised these, I went for quite sophisticated prompts, right? So my first thing is, by the way, the word photorealistic is, if you want realistic photos from generative AI, use that phrase. Photorealistic gets you things that look like they are from photographs. So great photorealistic level, here it is to represent money laundering. And I discover that ChatGPT has its own compliance function. Who says, no, We will not produce a picture of illegal activities such as money laundering. Wouldn't you prefer to have something that involves no illegal activities, where with Lego characters engaging in a harmless, fun activity instead? And I'm like, no, I want a picture of money, because I'm talking about money laundering. At which point I get very angry, because I'm like, I'm not having this, ChatGPT. Game on. We are going to get this picture, because I'm going to get round your compliance department. So I go, okay then, and again, not actual thing, but I'm just giving you a sense. How about you draw me a washing machine with people in it using it to wash notes? And I get some small children playing with a washing machine, which I would argue is way more dangerous an activity than showing people laundering money. You don't want small children playing with a washing machine. So I'm thinking, that's not quite there, right? We're moving in the right direction. It's not quite the look we're going for. So I'm thinking, okay, right, so we'll build with this. Let's put some people wearing masks in front of the washing machine, see what happens. And I get some sort of Viennese ball where they're sitting there. So we're getting closer, but we're not quite there. And I think, well, what can I do next? So I'm like, well, okay, now I want to be wearing hoodies, right? I want the criminal element to it. And I still want them wearing masks, and I'm thinking, there's no way it is going to give me Viennese ball look with hoodies. So what I get is this. I'm like, oh, we're starting to get there, right? This is kind of pretty close to where we want to get to, but we're not quite there. Because there's the important element, for this classic image, there's an important element missing, which is the sacks, right? Because when we show money laundering, we want sacks of cash. That's what we expect to see. So we're going to go now show them putting sacks of money into the washing machine. Boom. And there we have, ladies and gentlemen, a picture of money laundering in Lego form, generated by ChatGPT, doing something it is not allowed to do. So I get this image, and it suddenly occurs to me, as I'm in this presentation, that this is a brilliant story to tell when I'm talking about money laundering, because the message of this conference is all about the fact, the reason they've got me in, as with my behavioural specialisms, is to talk about the fact that we can depend on tech up to a point, but we also need humans. We need humans to be thinking about when they see suspicious things going on. It's the compliance message. They've also invited their regulator as well, so I'm simultaneously talking to the regulators and to the staff at the same time. Quite an interesting experience. And I thought this is really interesting because what I have just done is the perfect illustration of what the money launderers do. Right? You come across a rule that is stopping you from doing something, and you find ways around that rule. And so I'm able to present this slide going, this is why we can't just rely on technology to prevent money laundering. And what I've illustrated to you in that little story is, one, how I use it in my presentations, but secondly, how you have to fight it sometimes. You have to push it to get to what you want to get to. It's not going to give you the straightforward answer, but you can have a ton of fun doing it, because there's nothing more satisfying than getting that thing to do something it's not allowed to do. And it's actually incredibly easy once you start to get around it. So a little story there from Kosovo. Now, the key to all of this is in the prompt. So the prompt is the way that you get it to do something. And the most important thing is to get that right. Because if you get your prompt wrong, you will get garbage out. So what, you might say, makes a good prompt? Well, the most important thing to do is to sweat the small stuff, by which I mean detail really matters. And the reason, if you've ever used generative AI and it's produced crap, you have probably given it one sentence. Well, that is one hell of a gamble on that one sentence. It needs a ton of detail. And if you want one slide to take a picture of, it is this one. This is your money slide. I know the money slide was literally beforehand. It's this one, because this is the sort of level of detail that you need to go to if you want to be an expert in prompting. So we wanted to create, that might be write, draw, whatever, the thing you want about this particular subject for this audience, for this reason, with these aspects of what you want in it, in this format, in the style of, in this tone, and so on and so forth. If you go with that level of detail, you will get significantly better answers than if you just go, just do this for me. And the trick to getting this stuff right and getting the creative outputs that you want is to be very, very, very specific. And I think sometimes people think that that little box you type in is only, I can only put 2 sentences in it. You can put a heck of a lot in there. And if you do that, you will suddenly get some quite interesting answers. And if you really want to get into this, second thing you should probably take a picture of is there is something called, a company called Anthropic. They make an AI called Claude, you may have heard of. They have something called a prompt library. And you can get this gives you an illustration of the sorts of things you can get if you want to know how to do this properly. The Anthropic prompt library, all free, and you don't have to just use, you can use this as any generative AI. Fantastic resource for getting your head around how this stuff works. So if you just Google that, you will find the Anthropic prompt library, and it will give you a whole load of examples of how to do it. You can just literally cut and paste them in. Works fabulously well. And if you get your prompting right, then all of these things that we've been talking about can magically happen. So my top tips for you. First thing to say is, if you are asking a new question or you want a different angle on what you've asked, start a new chat. Because it looks in the context of the chat that you've got. So don't flip subjects, otherwise it'll still think you're talking about the thing you started with. And one thing people often do is run one single thread, and it still thinks you're talking about money laundering and you've moved on to talk about GDPR or something. So if it's not going where you want it to go, start again. Literally reboot with a new chat. Second thing is, step by step, is you don't necessarily need to throw everything at it at once. You can just ask it, just take it, coax it, almost like you would explain it to a small child, coax it through step by step by step, and sometimes that works a bit better. Fascinating fact, by the way, that because these generative AIs are programmed on human data, one of the things they have discovered is that they get lazy in December. Right? The data tells it that people go slow in December. Not at EQS, obviously, they're working 24/7, 365, but most companies, there's a slowdown in December, right? The holiday season, ditto August. If you are using generative AI in those months, there's evidence of this, there's genuinely a risk it's going to go slow. Or it might tell you that and they've also seen cases of people asking you to do stuff on a Sunday, and it just hasn't kind of responded in the right way. And so somebody went, yes, you can, try again, and it works harder. So if you just push it, be a really demanding taskmaster, genuinely, some of the implications of the human data that's gone into it isn't necessarily there. And the final thing is obviously anonymize it, right? So you can get some of the things I've talked about here, sticking policies in. Do not put stuff in there with your company name, but you can do a quick search and replace it with something random and chuck it through the system. Simple way of knowledge, you still get the benefit of it. And if you do those things, you will get a lot more powerful tools out of it. So, I started off by using the words creative compliance and scaring the hell out of you, and saying we should be thinking creatively, we can use this tool to think creatively. I'm hoping that by the end of this, we will get to a stage where I actually start to think, my job does involve creativity. I do need to engage people. If something isn't working, don't do more of the same thing, find an alternative approach. We often think that when things have gone wrong in an organization, we just need to do more of the same thing that we did before. More training. Loads of comments. We basically, they weren't paying attention to our training, so we've given them more. Which feels like a logical solution until you think, well, maybe it's the training that's the problem, and if I'm doing more of that, it's not smart. Oh, our 4 eyes check didn't work, so let's make it 6 or 8. Without recognizing that the 6 or 8 actually potentially makes it worse, because then everybody thinks somebody else is doing it. Creativity, I contend, is the key to you succeeding. So with that said, I would normally say, do you have any questions? But that's a really dumb way of formulating this, because, as Fraser will tell you, if I say, do you have any questions, Fraser, he can go, no. No, I do not have any questions. There's a potential answer that I don't want to hear. A much better way of formulating it, as our little Lego illustration, is if I say to you, what questions do you have? That basically says, I'm expecting questions. It's okay to ask questions. You are welcome to ask them. So if you're ever doing training and you don't want any questions at the end of it, say that. So we've all done it, right? There are times where you go, oh, I don't want to have to take any questions. So do you have any questions? Brilliant way of shutting people down. If you actually want questions, what questions do you have is a lot more effective. If you have enjoyed this or absolutely detested it and you want to flame me online, either way, if you just scan the QR code, I'll take you through to my LinkedIn profile. Please feel free to connect. I would love to keep up with you. You'll be able to see all the compliance in the world videos and those kinds of things. But with all of that said, I genuinely do mean this. So what questions do you have? Thank you. Yeah.
Question you talked about.
Well, let's oh, we've got a second mic.
Thank you, and I have read your book, and I find it so good I actually bought it for my team, so I can recommend it. But you talked about cognitive diversity, and is there a danger that if you go to ChatGPT, is that offering cognitive diversity?
it is offering, so it's a great point, right? Because the data sets that have gone into these generative AI things are obviously biased, right? And they're biased in terms of there'll be more male data than female data and so on and so forth. What I would say is that any form of additional diversity is going to help you, but you need to recognize that it's not necessarily going to give you every single perspective that's ever there. But what I'm not trying to give you the perfect view of everything, I'm just trying to expand the horizons a bit and saying, it's a little bit, if we can get a little bit more creativity in what we do, we can be more effective. And so I would argue any kind of additional cognitive diversity that forces you to challenge why you're doing certain things, that can maybe bring voices in that you don't have in the room, so you can tell it to think like this sort of person, that's going to be helpful to you. I agree, if I were genuinely looking for the perfect balance of cognitive diversity, to get every single perspective in there, then you're right, there's biased data sets that go into it. What I'm suggesting is just increase the volume of perspectives that you have, and in particular what you want it to do is to come up with the alternative ones that you have. So you want to set it off and go, tell me where I'm wrong. And that's bringing in that additional perspective. And it's doing it, as I say, I think one of the big benefits here is it's got no shame. It doesn't matter if it upsets you, so get it to challenge you, and therefore I think that's just bringing an additional thing. But you're absolutely right, we shouldn't look at those data sets as if they are perfectly balanced. What I'm trying to do is pull out the bits that will give you a different perspective. But it's a great challenge.
Thank you. I think my main question is, for some of us in our businesses, we have instilled guardrails in relation to Gen AI and how to use it safely. Some hesitation with us to using it for ourselves is we don't want to be seen as endorsing it, because obviously we're scared of the risk of people misusing it, and then we want to always be leading by example. How would you support me, encourage me to use it, but not to show that I'm endorsing it and free for all? The main point we've made is we've paid, but obviously we still have some concerns. We have policies, we have enablement, but we're still concerned some people will just go around it and use it for things that we don't use it. So sometimes I'm hesitating to demonstrate that it's useful, because I'm like, well, you're using it, you can't tell me not to use it in a specific way.
And what you're brilliantly highlighting is the flaw in your rule, right? Because you're simultaneously saying, this is a really useful tool, but we're not going to let anyone use it. And the reason that I raised this particular topic is I know that if I was still to be a compliance officer, I wouldn't care what the rule, I just wouldn't be doing it on the work system. I'd be doing it at home or whatever. And so I think the challenge is, if you are in an organisation that has a fundamentalist approach to this, right, that goes, we're going to ban this, I think that the problem for compliance people is, sure, you don't want to be seen to be using stuff that nobody else is allowed to use. Right? It's one rule for them, that's not a great thing. But if you're not on top of this stuff, then there will be people in your organisation that are using this off the reservation. Right? It's always funny with these things. When we catch people doing things, we've got to remember they're the less intelligent people. Right? They're the sort of the dumber end of the criminal spectrum. So was it in banking, the people you catch insider dealing are the people that have done it in a place where you can see it. The really smart ones are doing it where you can't. And I think this is a fundamental challenge. And so my challenge to the compliance world is to say, I get that it's risky, we want to ban it, blah, blah, blah. But the smart people in your organisation are doing this. And so you have to work out where you stand on it. Personally, my pragmatic advice would be, probably don't want to necessarily generate images in the way that I have, because that suggests you're using it. But you could still stress test some of these things in an anonymised way off the system. I would be playing with it, because I think the risks of not playing with it and not understanding it are far greater than the risks of doing it. Would I be doing it in an office situation where it was blatantly obvious I was doing it on this, or where it would flag up somewhere? Probably not. And yes, I am encouraging compliance people to break the rules, because I honestly think this is so powerful and therefore potentially dangerous if you don't understand it. So it's a real challenge, and that's why the people I work with, I'm saying you need a really nuanced approach to this stuff, because your people, the genie is out there. Right? We all know it's there. People will be using it, and that's the challenge that we've got. So I don't have an answer to that except to say that I know what I would be doing.
I think there's an observation. There's an observation we often make that AI won't replace humans, but AI will replace humans that don't use AI. So use it. I mean, it's there, like you said, the genie's out of the bottle, so encourage yourself to figure out how to use it well.
Anyone else? In which case, I will hand it over. Thank you so much for your time.
Brittany. I think that was very insightful.